I started with 3 different sized terracotta pots and saucers. Now I'm not a big fan of the terracotta color for my home, so I decided to give my pots a makeover with some paint. If you like terracotta, you can certainly skip this process. I started with Krylon paint and primer in satin leather brown, giving each pot and saucer 1 coat. I just really wanted to tone down the orange color, so 1 coat was all they needed. I found these terracotta pots at Hobby Lobby. They ranged in price from $3.99 to $1.99, and the saucers were in a pack of 5 for $1.99. You can certainly use any pots you have on hand for this project. After painting them brown, I wanted to give my pots an aged appearance, so I got out my folk art paints. Again, you could stop at this point and proceed with making the topiaries. I used a combination of country twill, linen, and raw umber on all 3 pots, but I made sure to make each one look a bit different by layering these colors in a different order. There is no right or wrong here, just go with what feels right for your decor. I went in with the paper towel scrunched up. I like the texture that the paper towel gives, but you can use a sea sponge or even a foam brush. Whatever you have on hand will work. With this medium-sized pot, I decided to concentrate the color country twill in the center and leave the banding on the top and bottom of the brown spray paint peeking through. I also made sure to add the color to the top rim and bottom rim. Also, don't forget the inside at least 1/4 of the way down, just in case your moss doesn't go all the way to the top of your pot. You want the overall color to be consistent. I then repeated the same color on the saucer. Next, I went in with the color linen. I wanted to give that salting appearance that comes with aged pots, so I dabbed it on randomly, but I used less of this color than I did of the first one. Last, I went in with the color raw umber to add some darkness. I made this very random, concentrating it more heavily in some areas. Once I had all the colors on the way I liked them, I used the paper towel that still had some of the color on it and used it to blend all the colors together. The paper towel was mostly dry at this point, so it was just blending and not laying down color. On the remaining larger and smaller pots, I used the same 3 colors, only layering them in a different order to give them all a unique appearance. To make the topiaries, you'll need your pots, some large wooden branches. We foraged for ours from the woods behind our home, but you can certainly use dowels from the craft store. I really loved how these had some moss and are very organic in appearance. Now, I know that some of you are thinking about all the little critters on these natural branches, but we will give these a clear coat of spray here in a minute to kill whatever may be lurking on them and preserve them as best we can. Each of these branches were a little different in size to keep with the varying size of my pots. You'll also need some floral foam. I had a combination of foam bricks and rounds on hand. Either will work. You just want to make sure they fit snugly, which will help to keep your topiaries upright. We will also be using hot glue to keep everything in place. I also had some moss on hand, but you can find this at any craft store. As for the greens, I went to Hobby Lobby on the week they had their florals and greens on 50% off. I purchased 11 of these little bushes at $3.50 a piece. My plan was to have Cory drill some holes in the end of each branch. I planned to cut each of the bushes apart and glue each individual stem into the branch to give them a more realistic appearance. You can certainly skip this step and use floral tape to adhere the entire bush to the end of each branch or dowel, and then arrange the bushes so that they drape. I also wanted my bigger topiary to look a little different, so I also bought 2 of these white floral bushes. They were $4.50 a piece. To begin, we needed to measure each branch with the corresponding pot. Since the pots were different sizes, we needed to make sure the height worked with each of them. Once we had each of the branches marked, Cory cut them accordingly. We then gave each of the branches a good coating of sealant for critter control and to help preserve the branches. Next, we needed to determine the size of the holes we needed to make for the stems. The holes should be just ever so slightly larger than the stems. Cory then very carefully drilled random holes around the top end of each of the branches, about a quarter of the way down from the top. We did about 20 to 25 holes in each branch. I then had Cory cut each of the stems from the bushes. The length won't matter at this point, as you will trim them as you go. I then began the task of hot gluing each stem into the branches. I made sure to fit them first before applying the glue. If the stem was too long, I made a quick snip to adjust and then glued them in place. On the bigger topiary, I wanted to add some of the white florals, so I began by placing the green stems randomly spaced before going in with the white. I only had 2 of the white bushes, so I knew I needed to add in the green for filler. I used 3.5 green bushes for each of the medium and small topiaries, and I used 4 green bushes for the larger one, as well as 2 of the white floral bushes. Once I allowed the stems to dry on each of the branches, I set about creating the topiary. I used the foam to anchor the branches into the pot, making sure to glue them in really well for stability. You'll want to make sure you center your branch before pushing them through the foam. I repeated this process for each topiary. I then began adding the moss. I also glued the moss down to the foam to keep it in place. The final step was gluing each pot to the saucer to give added stability to the topiary since they are quite top heavy. Be careful to center the pots so that they aren't glued down crooked, which could also cause balancing issues. I found these 2 dessert cups at a thrift store near us for $2.50 a piece. Cory began by giving each glass a slight scuffing with sandpaper so that the black spray paint would adhere better. The key is to find shallow bottom glasses so that the hurricanes fit properly, so keep your eyes peeled when you're out thrift shopping. If you don't want to wait, you can buy some on Amazon for a pretty reasonable price. Again, be sure the size and shape will fit the hurricanes. Our glasses measure 3.9 inches across, and our hurricanes measure 3 inches across. We used Behr spray paint and primer in matte black, giving each glass 3 coats, allowing to dry between each coat. I found these hurricanes at a different thrift store near us, and they cost us $6 a piece and were the perfect find. You'll also need taper holders. I found these on Amazon, and I will leave a link for you below. They cost $7.99 for the 2 and are very heavy metal holders. Great product for the price. You will also need some black felt to use as a buffer between the hurricane and the base. We had some on hand, but you can get squares for 25 cents at Hobby Lobby. The felt will also help to secure the hurricane inside the glass base, so this is a very important step. We cut the felt into a strip about 1.5 inches wide. We measured the length of the circumference of the glass and then folded it in half and glued it together to give more cushion to the hurricane. We then placed the felt strip inside the glass and tested it with the hurricane to make sure we had a snug fit. Next, we glued the taper holder to the bottom of the glass base. Be sure to get this centered as it will look odd in the hurricane if not. We repeated the same process for the second holder. Here are our finished hurricane taper holders. I love how they turned out, and they were an easy project, but with such a big impact. First, I gave each of the pieces a good cleaning. I then used some E6000 glue as well as my hot glue to secure each container to the top of the holder. Next, we used Behr spray paint in matte black to give each vase a good base coat. One coat is all we needed since I was going to add some additional acrylic paint mixed with baking soda for texture. Now, this next step should have been done first before the spray paint, but we both thought that the vases would look fine without filling in where we joined the containers to the holders. But once they were painted, I just didn't like how they looked because they needed to appear seamless. So I had Cory do some filling in of all the gaps. Now for reference, if you want to do this project, start with this step first before spray painting, and you can use any kind of joint compound or filler as long as you can sand it when dry. As you can see, the smaller of the vases had a large gap where the container sat because it fit inside the holder, where the larger container sat flush with the lip of the holder. I do like that they don't look entirely similar, otherwise you could fill that in so it looked like the larger vase. And this is how they looked after the compound had dried. Next, Cory gave each vase a good sanding with 120 grit sandpaper to create a smooth, seamless finish. And here they are, all smooth. We could have given them another coat of black spray paint at this point, but our nozzle on the can we had broke, and so I moved on to the next step. To recreate a textured metal look, I am using some acrylic matte black paint with baking soda mixed in. I don't have a ratio, I just mix in the baking soda until I have a somewhat thick paint, but not so thick that it won't spread. Since I knew I needed to cover all the joint compound, I decided to give each vase 2 coats of paint and baking soda. The first I brushed on as the base coat. Once the first coat had dried, I went in with the second coat of paint and baking soda and stippled on the paint, giving it a rough metal texture. This is how the finished vase looked compared to the one I hadn't applied the second coat to. And as you can see, the texture is really important to the overall appearance. Once they completely dried, Cory gave them a good coat of matte sealant. We found a brand new lamp, never used, for $8. When searching for a lamp to take apart, be sure it's newer so that you can use the cord. We really needed the neck as well, so be sure to find one that has a neck you like in order to recreate the lamp. We also found this round wood piece for $1.99 that we hope to use as the topper for our vase. At this point we had no vase, so we didn't know if this would work, but we bought it anyway. Now if you are lucky, you'll find a large enough vase to do this at the thrift stores. Since I wasn't lucky enough to find one, we stopped off at Hobby Lobby and bought one. They had their vases 50% off that week, so I lucked out and got one on sale. But it did cost me $47. I also found a lampshade on Amazon for $49. To begin our makeover, we knew we needed a hole in the vase for the cord, so Cory used a diamond bit, which makes cutting through pottery and glass much easier. We used a 3/8 inch bit. The key to not cracking your vase is to use light pressure when drilling, as well as some ice water to keep the bit and pottery cool. Also, placement of the hole is important. You don't want to drill through the base of the vase, which is very thick, so be sure to move your hole up so that you are drilling through the side wall of the vase. Took us a few minutes to drill for reference since I sped up the footage. We next needed to create a hole in the top of the wood piece for the neck of the lamp, and by the way, we lucked out with the wood round we thrifted. It did fit the top of our vase perfectly. Cory measured out the center and drilled a hole into the top of the wood. It's very important that you create the right size hole so that when you attach the neck to the wood, it will be secure and not wobble around. Now it was time to take the thrifted lamp apart. Cory loosened all the nuts keeping the lamp attached and removed the neck and wiring to use in our lamp. Now if you need help in wiring a lamp, we have a short video for you. We rewired some vintage lamps and we give detailed instructions on how to do it, so go check it out if you need the how-tos on attaching the wires. Now, it was at this point that Cory realized we couldn't use the socket of this lamp because it was made to have the wires soldered into place instead of using screws, so we had to come up with a solution. I had bought some extra wiring kits from Amazon to rewire some additional vintage lamps we had purchased, so we just robbed one of the sockets from that kit. Just goes to show you that sometimes your DIY plans get derailed, but we did find an easy solution that allowed us to still use most of our thrifted lamp. Cory pulled the soldered wires free from the thrifted lamp in order to attach them to the new socket. The next step in creating our new lamp was to add the wiring to our vase and then attach all the parts. At this point, we needed to attach the neck of the lamp to the base or top of our vase. Cory removed the nut and then placed the neck through the hole in the wood round and then re-secured it with the nut. Cory then fed the wiring through the hole of the neck and wired the socket. Now I didn't film Cory wiring this lamp, so please check out our 8-minute video on rewiring vintage lamps for help. Before gluing down the base, we wanted to make sure our lamp worked, and it did. We used E6000 glue to adhere the top of the base to the neck of our vase. We left it overnight to cure before moving on with our project. The next morning, Cory began the step of applying joint compound to where the wood base met the vase to give it a more seamless appearance. He did tint the compound with some brown acrylic paint because he knew I would be painting the vase. Now, since our vase had texture, Cory didn't make the compound overly smooth so that it mimicked the overall look and feel of our original vase. Now, he did use a foam brush to even out the rougher areas and to help blend it into the body. We allowed the compound to dry fully, which took about 6 hours. Before painting, I made sure to tape off the cord and the socket of the lamp. I decided to use a combination of black, brown, and butter pecan acrylic paints to achieve a kind of ombre effect. Now to start, I knew I wanted the very bottom of the lamp to have the lightest color. So I used mostly brown with a touch of black and a little bit of the butter pecan mixed together. I then applied the paint to the bottom portion of the vase. I really liked the texture this vase had, so I went in with one light coat of paint, allowing the underneath color and texture to come through. I thought it gave the vase an aged quality. For the next band of color, I mixed the same three colors, black, brown, and pecan, only I used more black this time to darken the color. Again, I'm trying to achieve an ombre effect. Now when layering on the colors, be sure to overlap them slightly. I will go back and blend these colors all together so it doesn't have to be exact. And this is how it looked after applying the first two colors. And now for the last color, I knew I wanted it to be dark, so I used mostly black with a hint of brown. And like I said, each of these layers will be blended together in the very last step. Once I had all three colors on and dry, I needed to go back and blend. The best way to blend colors together is to mix a shade in between the darkest and the middle color and then add water. To apply the paint, I'm using a paper towel to blot the watery mixture on and then blending it down from the darkest shade into the lighter shades. Now be sure to blot off excess before applying to your vase. Just keep blotting until you have the blended look you like. When you're done with all the blending, you'll have a subtle ombre effect that goes from darkest to lightest. And like I said before, I really loved the texture this vase already had, so I let it show through and only gave one coat of paint to the entire vase. It gave the lamp a weathered, aged appearance that I love. While at Hobby Lobby, we were heading down the clearance aisle and I found this wooden bowl, which was regularly priced at $37.99 for $9.49. I thought it would be the perfect size for our project, and I loved the ball detail at the top, which I thought would give it some much needed character. One of the little wooden balls was loose, but nothing some hot glue couldn't fix. And as for the base, I knew just the item. They carry these terracotta pots for 99 cents, and it fit our bowl perfectly. Before we could add the terracotta pot, we needed to remove the protective pads at the bottom of the bowl, along with all the stickers. I then set about fixing the little ball that was loose at the rim of the bowl. I used hot glue and it tends to ooze, so I made sure to clean up any excess as I didn't want it to show after being painted. Before gluing our pieces together, I wanted to be sure all the sticker residue and dust was removed, so I gave both the bowl and the pot a wipe down with some of my spray away window cleaner, which is ammonia free and doesn't leave a residue. I wanted to be sure I centered the base, so I used a Sharpie to give me a guide to use once I was ready to glue them together. Using E6000 for a more permanent bond and some hot glue for a quicker bond, I set about gluing the pot to the bowl, making sure to line up the base with my pre-marked guide. We then used some books to weigh down the piece to allow the glue some time to dry. Since I like our creations to look as seamless as possible, I had Cory add some joint compound to the gap where the pot met the bowl. Now be sure to wipe up any excess compound with a damp cloth. You can certainly skip this step and it will look just as good. We allowed the joint compound to cure overnight, and in the morning, Cory gave it a light sanding before I began the painting process. I'm going to use the tried and true method of baking soda and acrylic paint to achieve my pottery look. And for my base color, I used baking soda mixed with the color mushroom. And I will later use the color raw umber to add to the rim and to use for the speckling. And I also used the color linen for a wash to give the bowl a more aged appearance. You can use any color combination that suits your style and home. I made sure to use a good amount of baking soda for the first coat so that it would add a lot of texture. You want the paint thick, but not so thick that it won't spread when you paint it on. If you get it too thick, just add more paint to the mix. I didn't mind the darker color showing through around the rim since I planned on adding a darker color anyway, but I did use a small sponge applicator to dab in some mushroom paint to camouflage some of those areas. You may want to keep this in mind when looking for a bowl to recreate the look you want to achieve. A smooth rimmed bowl would be much easier to paint. Once the first coat had dried, which took less than 30 minutes, I applied a thinner mix of baking soda and mushroom paint for a second coat. And this is how the bowl was looking after both coats had dried. I was ready to tackle the aging effect. I did this by using the color linen mixed with water to create a wash. Now, I do begin adding this wash by pouncing it on with a paper towel, but after I realized I really wanted the overall look to be primarily whitewashed, so I went back over the entire bowl by wiping the wash on. I did like how some of the pounced paint showed through darker in areas, so I am happy that I did that technique first, but if you just want it whitewashed, you can skip the first step and just wipe on the wash. You could even use a sponge brush instead of a paper towel. And this is how the bowl is looking so far. Next, I went in with the color Raw Umber, watered down to make it less opaque, and began pouncing it on the rim, into the bowl, and on the outer rim. I brought that darker color down slightly. Also, I added it to the base and where the base connects to the bowl for added effect. I also used the damp paper towel with the darker color to wipe over the whole bowl without adding any additional paint to blend everything together. For the final step, I used a toothbrush to create speckling with the dark color. I absolutely love the effect it created. And don't forget to add the speckling to the inside of the bowl as well. Once everything had dried, I had Cory give it a good coat of poly in satin. I usually use matte on these types of creations, but I really wanted this one to have a slight sheen, and I love how it turned out. We found this vintage iron base at a local thrift store here in Knoxville, and I fell in love with it. The price was only $15 for this beautiful piece. We also found this thin piece of metal at a salvage yard. It was already cut and the perfect size for the top of our table. It was only $5 and more closely matched the inspiration if we painted it black. Cory set out to give it a good sand to make sure it was free of imperfections. The great thing about this is that we can always change out the top later if we get tired of it. We chose this textured spray paint in black by Rust-Oleum to help it better match the base. We used the textured black spray paint as the first coat, gave it a second coat in matte black spray paint, and then one last coat of black textured paint for the final coat. 3 coats of paint in total. Once the underside dried, Cory flipped it and repeated the process. Last, we sealed it with a matte clear poly by Rust-Oleum. Once everything had completely dried, Cory set about attaching the base to the top. Now, since we didn't really want it to be a permanent bond, we tried to use liquid nails, even though it states it doesn't bond metal. Again, we weren't looking to keep it glued forever in case I changed my mind about the top, which I've been known to do, but the liquid nails just didn't make a good adhesion, even for a temporary bond, and that metal top is dangerous. If it fell over, it could definitely take a toe off, so he went back in with the polyurethane adhesive in black that will give us a temporary hold that will be easier to remove later. With the base on and before it had time to set up, he made sure that everything was still centered. And here's a look at our completed table. You'll need to find a branch that has thick offshoots so that it can support the weight of your tape or candles. This could also be done with votive or tea light holders as well. Your branch should have offshoots but also have the ability to sit straight on its own. We purchased these candle cups from Amazon. They came in a set of 10, but we only needed 5 for this project today. I decided to paint the cups with some rub and buff and European gold, but this is certainly optional. We also sprayed the entire branch with some sealant just to kill anything living on it and also to help preserve the beauty of the branch. Next, it was time to attach the cups to the branch, and we did this with hot glue, but the really important part is to make sure each cup is level so that you don't have candles sitting every which way. If we attached one and it wasn't right, we simply removed it and started again. You also want to make sure that the cups are spaced in a way that makes sense and will give you the best effect when all the candles are in place, so take the time to figure out where you want them placed. I wish you could all see this branch in person because it is so very beautiful with all its weathered details. I can't wait to style it on our dining table for Christmas this year.